My pleasure here to bring up Nancy Talbot. Now, she is the president of BLT Research Team. Now, they are a registered nonprofit, by the way, so if the heart moves you after this presentation, they are open to donations. It's how they keep going, and those are tax deductible for you guys. Now, BLT Research is a group of scientists, and they're in various disciplines. There's near a dozen right now. They're working with over 300 field workers in multiple countries around the world. The primary focus has been the physical effects on plants and soils within crop circles. But however, as the work has progressed and the years have went on, well, it's become more and more evident to them that there's more at work here than simply known physics. And in fact, the hypothesis right now is now pointing to conscious interaction. This is exciting stuff, ladies and gentlemen. Nancy Talbot.
Very much appreciated. It's lovely to be here. I've heard about this conference for years and years and always wanted to come, couldn't afford it, but made it this time. We have a lot to cover, and I want to do a very tight encapsulation of the science work because of the time constraints today, and then get on to this boy in Holland with whom I've been working for many years, and there's some absolutely amazing things going on. As Bob said, a lot of the results, the data, are beginning to indicate that the current scientific models don't cover what is going on. So let's start. The BLT team began in the early 1990s when John Burke, this is the elusive John Burke, a New York businessman interested in electromagnetic properties in the crop circles, and William Levengood, a biophysicist in Michigan, and I teamed up to try to study the circles in a more scientific manner than had been done so far. In particular, Levengood's expertise is plant biophysics. He's had a long career studying both biology and physics, and he had a number of ideas as to what he thought was going on. In addition to this early group, we had field workers all over the world who were willing to help us because we couldn't possibly cover, as you know, there's so many crop circles, there's no way that a small group could get to all of them, or even a large majority of them. Here we have Danny Lobb and Ruben Uriarty from California, out in the English countryside. In Canada, another group. And what these people do is notify us that a crop circle has occurred, and then there are a number of procedures that we carry out in the field. We measure the crop circles, we do a lot of magnetic work, compass work, and then sampling depending on which science advisor we're working with. In Levengood's case, it was primarily plants, and here are a group of plants coming out of a crop circle in England. Hundreds of these samples are taken, both from inside the events and controls taken from outside. This is a small group that were taken from just one crop circle. And when they're taken in Europe or in any country other than the United States, we have to dry them down before they're shipped because opportunistic molds will affect the results that we're looking for. The basic changes that we have discovered over the years are as follows. Apical node length change. The top graph that you're looking at there are the samples. The bottom are the controls. This is the node just beneath the seed head, the top node beneath the seed head. And we find that this is elongated over the controls throughout the circle itself. Furthermore, this happens not just in the downed crop inside the circles, it occurs in standing crop inside the circles. In this particular case, which is the East Mean Crescents back, I think, in '95, we sampled this, and the diagram here is showing you these red bars are showing you the increased node length in the samples in the down crop in this case. The green bars indicate the standing crop, which in this particular formation was not affected. It's a very complex situation. Whatever this is that is happening is not a simple 1-2 formula. In some cases, only the down crops are affected. In some cases, the standing are also. A formation in Chehalis, Washington, a good number of years ago, and what we're interested in here is the large circle. And if you notice, there's a standing tuft in the center of this circle. When the node lengths were examined in this particular case, what we're seeing here is node length on the left, on the vertical axis, and then the distance from the center. At the very left of the graph at the top, you see the greatest node length change there is in the standing tufts in the center there. And the remaining points indicate the node length change, which is decreasing as a function of distance. The closer we get to the edge of that circle, the smaller and smaller and smaller the nodes are becoming. When you have a linear change like this, a very clear linear change, it's a pretty good indicator that this is not random node length change. We discovered in this particular event, and have now seen it several times since, this is from Oregon in 1997, that if you sampled out into the field the control lines, which went away from this formation out to the road and back into the field, that those node lengths increased. They were greatest at the edge of the circle, decreasing as we got farther and farther away from the formation itself. Again, a linear change indicating that the energy was most concentrated right at the edges of that particular formation, spreading out into the standing crop. So when we hear from the debunkers and or the hoaxers that they are making all these things by mechanically flattening crop, you have to ask, well, how in the world do you create node length change in standing crop? Not only inside the crop circle, but outside in the control part of the field. The second most reliable indicator that is visible, these are things you can actually see with your eyes, are these expulsion cavities. This one came from a very elaborate formation in England. You hear often that simple circles are the only genuine events. This, from our data, is not the fact. In fact, many of the complicated or intricate events that we've sampled have in fact shown these changes. Here's a situation in Germany. If you look at the nodes along the center there, you will see the expulsion cavities taken from all of these various, very whimsical looking crop circles. It's a case in southern England, node length increase, as well as expulsion cavities. And this is the formation that first picture was taken. It was near the Adam and Eve stones. And I would imagine that you would not say that that's a simple crop circle. I assume that this would fall in the category of one of the more complex. There were expulsion cavities all over this thing. What we have been noticing lately, this is in the last couple of years, in the first years that we did this work, we would occasionally see expulsion cavities, and they would only be, if they were present, in the second node. This is the second node beneath the seed head. We count from the top down, not from the bottom up. So occasionally we would see these holes blown out in the second node. And it was fairly rare, 25% of the cases perhaps. What we're seeing now, beginning in the year, I think it was 1999, was the first case, and then in 2000 in corn, are these expulsion cavities occurring not just in one node, but all the way down the plant stem. And I'm going to show you a couple cases of that. In corn, when you're talking 8 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot, in some cases 13-foot tall corn, the amount of energy that it would take to cause this must be enormous. What Levengood believes is going on in both the node lengthening and the expulsion cavities is that the moisture inside the plant stem is being heated by perhaps microwaves. He doesn't know for sure, but microwaves are the only energy we know about that could do what we're seeing. So he proposes that a microwave type energy is heating the moisture inside the plant stems very quickly, literally in a nanosecond, causing that moisture to turn to steam. The steam then, of course, has to escape. On the upper nodes of the plants, the tissues are very elastic, they stretch, and the steam simply seeps out, leaving those nodes stretched once it has escaped. Farther down the plant stem, the fibers are very tough. They don't stretch, and as the steam builds up, just like in your microwave oven, what happens is it explodes, and you end up with these holes. Now, in this case in Canada, this is one of the expulsion cavities that we found in that particular event. They were all throughout it. And here in another case in Canada, I was trying to photograph 3 to show you that 3 of those nodes were affected. Only 2 of them actually came out in the photograph. But we have now seen them literally 8, 9 of these things in full-grown corn all the way down the plant stem. Something seems to be increasing. One of the energy components, and it appears to be the microwave component, is apparently increasing. Another primary change, which you're not likely to be able to see in the field, is the development of the seed. When crop circles occur in immature plants, the seeds are very markedly affected. But regardless, in every case that we've looked at, the seeds are slightly smaller in the crop circle than in the rest of the field. And when you weigh them, they weigh less. There is also a wrinkling of something called the endosperm, which I can't really see it on the screen to point it to you, but you see this all the time in the samples. On the left of the screen, you're seeing the controls, and on the right, you're seeing the samples, this being a case in corn. Now, when the crop circles occur in immature crop, these are occasions usually in May and in June, occasionally in the early part of July. When the plant is still developing, the seed has not yet fully formed. What happens is that not only do the seeds not develop properly, when those seeds are germinated, and in this case, these are all laboratory germinations, what we find is that the affected crop circle seeds do not germinate normally, and they don't grow normally. In many cases, they grow so poorly that they simply would not reproduce, the next generation would not survive. Here, what we're looking at on the top are the samples taken from a particular formation, and on the bottom, the controls. You can see that the controls are much more robust than the samples. Here's a case from Canada. You're looking here at the controls, and here we have the samples. Because of the brevity, I can only show you a few things. This happens case after case after case after case. And you have to realize that what we're looking at here are simply a few representations of the hundreds of cases that we've worked on. The most interesting result that we've seen actually is when crop circles occur in more mature crop. In this case, the seeds are fully formed before the event occurs. So we're talking mid-July through August. The seeds again will be dehydrated, they will be shrunken, they look as if they're not going to germinate. But what they do is not only germinate faster, they grow up to 5 times the rate of normal. This is the rate of the controls. They produce greater yield, more seeds in that growing plant, and they do it without light or water for long periods of time. It's important to note that these effects occur not only in the geometric crop circles, but in the more randomly downed areas, which you see close to this particular formation. Randomly downed crop often shows the same effects as we find in the geometric events. Here's a case in Canada where it was completely randomly downed in a field of grasses. And on the left here, you see the samples and then a few controls on the right. You cannot write off randomly down crop as if it is not involved. In many cases, it is not involved. In some cases, it is simply weather damage or over-fertilization and subsequent weather damage. But in some cases, particularly where this randomly downed material occurs near a formation, you can be pretty sure that you're going to see the same changes in the randomly downed areas as you do in the geometric events. This was the case that clued us into the increased growth and yield without water or sunlight. These are samples from a formation in grass in California. And after Levengood had taken the samples out and taken the bits and pieces he needed to do his work, he put all of the samples and controls back into the box that they'd come from. He thought he'd taken them out to the incinerator, and apparently had not. Some 8 days later, he discovered the box again under some things in his laboratory, and there had been no light and no water for these plants for a period by that time with the mailing probably of 13 days. On the left, what you're looking at is the control, or one of the controls, and on the right is the sample. As you can see, it's vigorously growing with no light and no water for probably 13, maybe 14 days. Because of John Burke's interest in the Earth's magnetic field and magnetic anomalies on the Earth's crust, he and Levengood talked a lot about the ancient pyramids, the dolmen in England, Indian mounds, etc. And in wondering why these structures had been built by so many civilizations around the world, John had an idea that perhaps there was something unusual physically going on at these locations. And he began doing magnetometer work at places like Harnack in France, in England at Avebury and Stonehenge and a number of other sites, in Guatemala at Takao, and at Indian mounds here in the United States, and at rock chambers like this in New England. What he found consistently was that there were very specific magnetic anomalies in very precise locations relative to the structures at all of these different events. This inspired him to ask Levengood to carry out some additional work. They took seeds in each country indigenous to that country and placed them in varying locations relative to this anomaly which John would have measured. And then did this for many, it took several years of trials to see how long the seeds should be left and exactly in what place they should be left. But the idea was to see if there was any change in seedling growth. And lo and behold, this is what they found. That when the seeds were placed, depending on the species or the variety, for a particular period of time, in exactly the right location at these ancient monuments, whether they were in North America or South America or Europe, what we got were these changes in growth habit. Here, I think these are from the Indian mounds near Michigan. We have some samples. These are from South America, where you have, I can't read that too good. Are the bottom the controls? Can you all read that? Unfortunately, I can't. I mean, this depressed growth was seen over and over and over again at these chambers, and in other cases, the increased growth. John Burke got the idea that ancient people may have discovered these anomalies, these magnetic anomalies in the Earth's crust by accident. We know that people who are temporal lobe unstable, and that's some 4% of the population, are extremely sensitive to variations in the electromagnetic environment. It's conceivable that such people, since it appears there have always been temporal lobe unstable people, they may have been very sensitive to these particular locations. John has just written a book about all of this, and those of you interested in earth energies and the possibility that these ancient areas were developed for specific reasons related to magnetic anomalies should get the book. It's available on Amazon.com, Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. Node bending is something entirely different. We know that node bending, these are the knuckle-like protuberances on the plant, on the stem of the plant. When you see that sort of bending, it can be part of the energy effects caused by the crop circle formation itself. However, it can also be due to two things known to science very well: phototropism and gravitropism. These are the plant's natural recovery processes in response to gravity and to sunlight. If you flatten a crop and it is not killed, it will try to reorient itself. And it will do this much more vigorously in young crop than in older crop. When you get to the end of July and in August, it sometimes can't do it at all. So what this means is that if you get to a crop circle right after it's happened, within the next day or day and a half, and you see marked node bending like this, then it's significant. It has something to do with what happened when the crop circle occurred. If you don't know how long ago the crop circle occurred, and particularly if it's in young crop and you see this, you don't know whether it's simply the plant trying to recover or whether it actually happened when the formation occurred. One clue is that when it's related to the formation energies, the bending will tend to go to the left and right rather than upward. If it's going upward and you don't know when that crop circle occurred, you can be almost certain that has nothing to do with the formation process. It simply has to do with the plant recovering. The last basic information that Levengood worked on for a while was this business of magnetic particles in the soils. Quite by accident, we discovered in a formation in '93 at Chur Hill that occurred during a meteor shower. Masses of this material, here it is embedded in the seed heads from that formation, but also sticking to chunks of soil. Clearly, this has been in the molten state. Levengood assumed that microscopic particles of meteoritic iron, which filtered Earth down to Earth all the time, in fact, because this was during the Perseid meteor shower, that there was a great deal of this material filtering down through the atmosphere. Since his concept of what is going on is the idea that we're dealing with thermodynamically unstable, very turbulent atmospheric plasma systems, and plasmas, when they spiral, emit microwaves. They also have these unusual electrical pulses associated with them and strong magnetic fields. His idea was that these tiny little particles, I mean literally very tiny, you can't see them, were drawn into the spiraling plasma that was getting ready to create this crop circle by the magnetic fields associated with the plasma, then heated up by the microwaves being emitted by it, falling to Earth in the molten state, leaving chunks of soil like this, and these tiny little spherical particles. These are in the range of 10 to 50 microns in diameter. We found them in that original formation, and subsequently have seen them in many others. It's of interest that it's a very pure iron. The top, these are EDS graphs. The top EDS is of the soil itself, but it's the bottom graph that you should be looking at. And you can see it reveals very clearly that this is a very pure iron, simply iron and oxygen. It's magnetic, which means it was formed in a magnetic field, and we find them dispersed in the crop circles in very interesting patterns. Again, it's not a simple thing. Sometimes they're concentrated at the centers of crop circles. Sometimes they're grouped around the edges, the perimeters, and sometimes they're spread out into the field itself. This is a case from Marion, New York, of multiple circles. We sampled 3 on the soils here, and what we got was this distribution outside the crop circles. This is going from the edge of the crop circles way out into the control field, and we find that the particles at the edges on the left-hand side of the graph, we're going farther and farther away from it, and the particles are dropping off again in this linear fashion. The other 2 circles, just so you can see how consistent it was in that case. In this case, in Canada, in Saskatchewan, we're going to be looking at the ringed circle here. Oh, there it goes. This is the sampling diagram to show you how the various diameters that we sampled there. And what we found in this case, now the center of the circle is on the left side of the graph, and we're going out to the edge. The amounts of the particles are increasing, and again in a very linear fashion. This is suggesting to us centrifugal force, I mean something rotating, is delivering these magnetic particles. Very briefly, Levengood's ideas, and his is the only published hypothesis so far. It's the only hypothesis that's based on scientifically derived data. I'm not certain that is the final hypothesis, but if you want to publish, and we've published 3 papers in the scientific literature, you really do have to offer some sort of a rationale, some explanation for what the data that you have. What he's offered so far is that the upper atmosphere is primarily plasma. It's electrified air masses. We know this is a sun solar flare, that there is a massive amount of this energy surrounding the Earth, the planet Earth. This is a low energy plasma discharge. These are these northern lights, which spiral, although when you see them you can't always tell that. The photograph kind of shows it. They're a spiraling plasma system, which when the energy level is high enough, glows, and then we can see them as the northern lights. A higher energy plasma system that you'd be familiar with, of course, is a lightning strike. Recently, very recently, these were just discovered. Levingood suspects that there may be a new or another atmospheric energy plasma system that science doesn't know anything about. Given that this was literally announced to the public in 2003, the discovery of these blue jets, he may be right. It may be that there is an energetic plasma system that science doesn't yet know about, and it may, in fact, be making the crop circles. He's been asked many times as to why do so many crop circles occur in southern England? Why do they go where they go and not in other places? One possible answer to that is that the ground electrical charge increases in southern England every summer. There's a chalk aquifer. Chalk is the most porous rock. As water percolates down through the chalk, it sets up an electrical charge. We've measured this in southern England on several summers and found that it did increase. Possibly this is functioning as an attractor to these atmospheric energy systems. Now, this woman, Diane Conrad, is a geologist in Utah. She had heard about Levingood's idea that microwave radiation or a heating agency of some kind was involved in the crop circle formation process. Her particular expertise is the effect of heat on clay minerals in crop circle soils. And there was a crop circle in Utah in 1966. Up at the top there is a picture of what it looked like. And it was near her house. And so she decided to take some soil samples and see, what she would find. It's important to note in that particular crop circle, this is inside, and you can see how messy, how chaotic actually the lay is. Many people have this idea that if a crop circle doesn't have a pristine, elegant lay, that it is therefore to be dismissed. Our work absolutely indicates that that is not so. Both in those formations and in ones that look like this, we have found these same things over and over again. So I don't think that a chaotic lay should turn you away from a formation. At any rate, Diane took a couple of samples from inside the formation, a couple of controls, and then carried out a process known as X-ray diffraction. This simply measures the degree of crystallinity in the crop circle soils. And she thought that she saw a change, an increase in crystallinity inside the crop circles. This was enough so that I wanted very badly to repeat that test, but to do it in a formal way with enough samples and enough controls to get statistical relevance. We were very lucky that Lawrence Rockefeller finally heard about us a couple of years ago and called me and asked me if I'd come to give him some information about our work. And after he had heard about our work, after I'd been there, he offered me a study. What would I like to do? And it was this one that I decided would be the best thing. This is a crop circle in Canada, and because of his generosity, we were able to do this properly and to obtain some amazing results. Again, here's the lay inside that particular formation. This is barley, and actually a lot of thistle in this field. And as you can see, it's not neat and tidy at all. It's quite chaotic. There were 3 layers of lay in all of those circles. Around the bottom, you had that ring. In the middle, you had a radial lay, the crop laid from the center going right out to the edges. And on the top is this very chaotic section. a sampling diagram showing you one of the samples. We did 3 circles out of this event. I wish we'd been able to do more, but we were limited by financial constraints. And we began by having Levengood do his routine with the plants. We did find elongated nodes within this formation throughout. Here's a graph showing you we actually had a 109% increase over the controls in the smallest circle. A circle here is the small circle, B is the medium-sized, and C is the large circle. This is something we find regularly also, that the effects are often greater in the smaller circles. I know people are always drawn to the larger part of the formation, but the energy effects may be much greater in the smaller. This was the first case in which we saw the expulsion cavities all the way down the plant stem. We have 5 plants taken from inside on the left, 5 controls on the right. They're simply cut there in order to take these pictures. And you can see the expulsion cavities are in all 3 nodes in the plants from the circle. I wanted to make sure that this study held up. And so what I did was I went looking for scientists who could do each part of the work without any prior knowledge of crop circles, without any bias whatsoever. Also, of course, they had to have all the proper accreditation. In this case, this is Dr. Sam Iyengar, who's a materials science specialist and also has a degree in geology. And he had never heard of crop circles. He had all the right credentials. We had enough money to cover the costs. And so I asked him to do the extraction of the clays from the soil samples and then the X-ray diffraction work. That's the machine there. He had never heard of crop circles. He knew nothing about them at all. In fact, all he knew was that he got a bunch of soil samples from which he was to extract the clays and then do the X-ray diffraction work. These are some of the graphs. We have hundreds of these, but to show you what we're looking at on these graphs, the peaks, where the arrow is pointing is the illite smectite peak. How in the world he knows that, I don't know. But the point is that as the sample becomes more crystallized, the peak becomes narrower. They measure the peak at half height and get a value they call the Kubler indexed. So what we were looking at are these Kubler index results. Are they smaller? Does this indicate a degree of crystalline change or not? The next step was to get the results that Sam provided to me analyzed by a professional statistician. Toward that end, I went to MIT and talked to some people, and they recommended a guy who had been at MIT, was now out in Ohio. The very first question that we asked Dr. Raghavan was, and he also, by the way, had never heard of crop circles, didn't have any idea what they were. All he was given was the data itself and then asked some questions. We wanted to know if the Kubler index, if there was any difference between the samples and the controls. And if there was a difference, was it statistically significant? He came back with, yes, there was a difference, and it was at the 95% level of confidence, which is required by professional science. This is Dr. Raghavan himself. The next question I wanted to have answered was, we knew that there were node length changes throughout the formation, and we knew where they were. And so I sent that data to him and asked him to compare the node length changes to the Kubler index changes. Was there, in fact, any correlation between where the plants were affected and where the soils were? Now, each plant sample was taken, the soil samples were taken at each plant sampling location, so they're all taken at exactly the same places. And what he found was that the plant changes occurred at almost precisely where the soil changes occurred in 99.2% of the cases. I mean, it's as good as it gets. I mean, in fact, what this data tells us is that whatever caused those node length changes also caused the crystalline change in the clay minerals in the soils. Now, there's a big problem with that. Crystalline changes in clays do not occur in surface soil. They occur because of the pressure of mountains pressing down on sediments over thousands of years. We could find, oh, I'm sorry, I meant to show you, this is simply the graph showing you the correlation between node length and Kubler index. I knew from Sam that the changes in the crystalline structure don't occur in surface soil. And yet, Dr. Raghavan's work, and he redid it several times, clearly indicates the same energy source causing both of these effects. I was lucky enough to get the help of a world-famous mineralogist, Dr. Robert Reynolds at Dartmouth. He was head of the Department of Earth Sciences and then emeritus. A world-famous mineralogist, writes the books, and his particular expertise are the illite smectites in clays and the X-ray diffraction technique. I wanted him simply to look at the data and tell me what it meant. Now, Dr. Reynolds had never heard of crop circles either. So each one of these, and these scientists don't know each other, so each one of them is independently talking to us. Dr. Reynolds didn't believe the data when he first got it. He told me it was impossible, this couldn't be. So then he asked me if he could see the actual mounts, the actual samples that Sam had worked on. So we sent all of those to him. He, at Dartmouth, on his machine, then redid the X-ray diffraction work. And he came up with the same answer. It took about 3 months, but he finally was convinced that, in fact, the work was rigorous. The machines we had used were up to date and calibrated properly, and that the result was real. Now, the problem is, how do you explain this? If it takes geologic pressure to cause this change in crystalline structure, and it takes thousands of years, how in the world did it occur in surface soil in a crop circle? He thought that perhaps heat, conceivably heat, in the range of 600 to 800 degrees Celsius, he said, for a period of hours, could cause that same effect, possibly. The problem with that idea is that, of course, heat like that would have completely burned up the plants. I mean, we wouldn't have had any plants in the field. We'd have had an incinerated field, and we didn't. And so the end result from Dr. Reynolds was we had to be looking at an energy unknown to science. A very brave man. He asked us to do one more thing, and he wanted to try this hypothesis that the microwaves were involved. And he asked me to take a bunch of the controls after we'd finished all the other work and expose them to microwave radiation for a period of 1 minute, 10 minutes, and then 60 minutes to see if we could cause, by using microwave radiation, these same changes. It turns out we could not. So it ends up, that study ends up with the idea that we're looking at an energy unknown to science. That's the end of the science part. Now I'm going to very briefly talk about a couple of the stunning crop circles that happened this last summer, and then get into Robert van der Broek in Holland. The case in Holland has been going on for an awfully long time, and I have been wanting very much to tell people what I knew, but it was not allowed until very recently, because Robert has gone public now in Holland himself and has decided to deal with the barbs, and they are coming fast and thick. In the United States, because we are in the United States, and I thought you should know this if you don't, there were 5, 6 formations in North Carolina in the mountains near Asheville. What was unusual about them primarily, and from my point of view, was that they were in the mountains. We don't often hear of crop circles in that area. In fact, I'd never heard of them before down there at all. This is the first one that we heard of in a place called Green Mountain near Asheville. Then we had this lovely thought bubble, Shades of England, a number of years ago in North Dakota. And if you look at this, notice in the lower right-hand corner of that slide, where there you have the randomly down crop. And in this case, it did in fact reveal the same changes that we found in the formation. We did find node elongation in both the randomly downed and in the formation itself, and it was greater in the randomly downed. The seeds taken from the samples did in fact weigh less. We haven't done the germinations yet, but we know that they were slightly smaller, and overall they weighed less than the controls. Then there was this case in Cole County, Illinois, which was the first time I've ever seen this. This formation itself is a large circle and another circle near it, and this is in corn, about 6 foot tall corn, actually. The smaller circle, both circles had a radial lay, the plants coming from the center out to the edge. It's a relatively rare lay, but in fact, in both of those it occurred. This is a small circle, and this is the larger one. Now, what's interesting is that that larger one had a layer around the edge of it that was laid on top of the radial lay. I've never seen this before, not in corn. It's the very first time. Here's a picture that shows that layer running around the end, the perimeter of that larger circle, on top of the radial lay. There was one other interesting aspect to that formation, and it was this break in the plant stem down at the base of the plant. Here's a close-up of it. This is something we're beginning to see in corn again, just in the last couple of years. There is a condition known as brittle snap that can cause breaks like this. It happens in certain hybrids when there's been a very wet period at a very precise time in their growth stage. But when it occurs only in the upper nodes, and it occurs because of weather. There's been some violent storm. In these cases, we have taken several of these where we are finding this break. They're all down at the bottom of the plants. They are not the right hybrid. They did not have a particularly wet growing season. And furthermore, the breaks are confined entirely to the crop circle. If this were brittle snap, you would find it throughout the entire field. And in one field in Canada, the field workers there, who are literally incredible people, went through 40 acres and whacked every single plant to see if they could cause this. It occurred only in the formation itself, not in the controls. And this is the most amazing American case, to my mind, this summer. In Greene County, Ohio, this herringbone thing, I'm not sure this is even a crop circle. I don't know what it is, but let's look at it. From the air, had you seen this, it would not have caused you to pay any attention at all. A farmer there had knew a little bit about our work from the internet and called us directly, asked us to come down and look at it. This is one of their photographs taken right after they discovered it. There is literally an interwoven herringbone effect. I don't know how you would do this if you had all the time in the world and all the people in the world. There was aerial light phenomena associated with this, as there have been with many of the other American ones. A UFO really was seen in this direct area by a neighbor. But I don't know how in the world they do it. We did find bending at the base of the plants in that formation. We also noticed this. You see the seed heads? When crop is old, this formation happened at the end of the summer when the plants were almost completely dry. And anybody who's been in the fields knows that the tops of the plants lop over as they become mature and dried out. In crop circles, though, that happen in genuine crop circles that happen in the fall or in the late summer, those seed heads get straightened out. Now, you can't do it by hand. If you try to do it with regular, it just simply breaks. The seed heads break. And yet in this formation, they were all straight. There are just a few shots here to give you a clearer picture. The overall shape was terribly irregular, had no symmetry to it at all, simply the internal aspect. This chart is here to simply show you the rows, the way the rows were laid. The first four were laid in a particular fashion, then the next four were laid in a different fashion, and then each they repeated all the way across the 60 rows. We have no idea how it could even be done if you had all day and loads of people. I mean, is it a crop circle? I'm not sure. In England, there were a couple of stunning events, this one at Garsington, and I'm just going to show you a few photos of the lay in these cases. Some of the English formations are so elegant, as are many of the English themselves. Isn't that something, that one? A friend of mine from Norway got up there, thank God, and got these pictures. The lay in these various aspects of that formation, just incredible. It was in an area that is not always visited by crop circle people, and it might not, if she hadn't gone up there, we might not have these photos. Then there was this unbelievable thing at a place called Marden. Again, an area that doesn't get lots of crop circles, but my Lord, when it gets them, it really gets a dilly. Look at the outer ring that connects those four, well, no, not actually, the one that goes all the way around the outside. This photograph shows you how wide that was. I'm very interested in looking at formations to look at the width of some of these rings, because I'm waiting for one where a human foot won't fit. Now, this is a closer view of the center of that, and many people saw a horse right there in the center. I'll get even closer. But what you start to realize is the plants aren't laid down. They're laid up. You know, they're 6 or 8 inches tall and then laid over. My Lord, absolutely astonishing. And I even have a shot. Look at that. Isn't that marvelous? Now, I suppose some of these effects, I mean, this wasn't tested, so I'll never know. And I suppose some of these effects could be created by hand, but could all of those effects in that one formation in one night? I don't think so. The last one that I want to talk about in England is, this is the first case of a UFO being photographed in broad daylight over a crop circle. There have been a number where they've been farther away, you really couldn't tell, but this one, by God, you can tell. It's a place called Boreham Down, and a bicyclist was riding on the road toward Alton Barnes. It's very close to the Alton Barnes area. And he suddenly saw, off to his left, in a field that rose up from the road, some weird-looking objects. And this is a drawing of pretty much what he thinks he saw. They were moving through one edge of the field, leaving trails behind them. He stopped the bike, got off, realized that there was something unusual, that this wasn't exactly normal, and watched them just for a few minutes. After a few minutes, though, of watching him and watching them and recognizing that this was not normal, so it came into his mind that he should probably get on his way. He had a camera with him. He could have taken photographs, but it never occurred to him to get it out. It was simply, well, yes, this is very unusual, time to finish my bike ride. And he got right back on the bike and went on. The next day, these tracks, he went back and he photographed these strange tracks that these things had left in the field. It was that next day that the crop circle itself was discovered. We don't think it actually was there. The field undulates. It could have been there and he just didn't see it, but it's more likely that it occurred that night and was discovered the next morning. This diagram simply shows you the 4 tracks in the upper left made by the strange objects and the formation which was discovered the next morning. Now, a friend of mine from Belgium went to examine these tracks for me, and he didn't get there till later in the season. This is the same track that you saw earlier in the young crop. It's now August. And if you notice, the lay is strange. The crop is laid from the edges in, giving you these little mounds all the way up the center. He noticed a number of things in the tracks which he did not see in the formation itself. In the upper left-hand corner here, you'll have to look hard, it's not too visible. He observed these elongated nodes throughout the tracks. He did not see any in the crop circle itself, which by now, of course, was the same age. Now, this may be, in this case, phototropism or gravitropism or both, but because there are absolutely none of them in the crop circle, in the geometric event, which is in the same field, the same plants, since there is none of it going on there, and it is all over the tracks, my guess is that it's probably significant, and had it been sampled at the time these events occurred, that we would be able to prove that. Here are just some of the plants that he took out of the tracks, showing you the elongated and bent nodes. I found out through my friends in Norway that that object, that weird-shaped object, had been seen before and photographed. This is a photograph of a similarly shaped object from 1956 in Sweden. A couple fishermen saw this thing rise right next to the lake, apparently, where they were fishing, and got one shot. So it appears that whatever that was, it may have a predecessor. And this is the final result at that Boreham Down site in England. Some friends of mine in France were there in August. This was 5 or 6 weeks after the crop circle occurred. And this is the object that Pierre photographed while he was there. He didn't see it with his eyes. His wife was in the field with him. She didn't see it. But he gets many anomalous photographs at a place called Col de Vence in southern France. And if you don't know about that website, you should write this down. It's simply www.coldevence, it's COLDEVENCE.com, and go look at that website. You will see, if you want to see anomalous photographs, they're unbelievable. So he gets them constantly, regularly, in certain places, and he is the guy who took this photograph. Again, it wasn't visible to him or his wife, but it's directly over that Boreham Down field. And this is Robert. Robert a couple of years ago. I first met Robert because I was hearing stories from some of our field workers in Amsterdam. And they told me of a young boy, he was, I think, 14 or 15 when this first started, who was having a number of very strange experiences. This tree is a very important tree. And in fact, it's on the back of his book here. He had been out in the fields on his bicycle, and apparently it's about dusk, and he observed multiple balls of light, I gather about basketball-sized, off in the field, rotating around themselves. He got off the bike to watch and started to walk down into the field. And as he did so, one of these balls of light detached itself, came toward him, apparently circled around his head, at which point he passed out. And when he woke up, he was lying in the middle of a brand new crop circle. That was the very beginning of the crop circles and Robert. Since then, so much has happened. I couldn't tell you if I had 5 hours. He's written a book, and I'm going to make sure you know how to get that, etc. And there will be other books coming out. But from that day on, he would have strange dreams or awarenesses when a crop circle was happening somewhere in his area. They happen in the field right behind his house. They happen in many other fields quite far away from his house. But he will know. He knows when they're coming, and usually he knows exactly where they are when they've arrived and what they look like. But the way I actually got involved with him was because one night, one of these balls of light had approached his house. He and his sister were inside the bedroom listening to music. And this enormous ball, glowing ball of light, 12, 14 feet in diameter, came right to the windows at his balcony and frightened the kids half to death. After they'd gone and gotten their parents and come back, what they found was this white powder lying on the floor of the balcony right outside his bedroom. There were burn marks on the outside of the door, there were burn marks on the eaves, but it was that white powder which brought me into Robert's life. This is the back of the house. The rooms that are very important in this house, upstairs, that's Robert's bedroom, and the small balcony. Beneath is the living room, which we're going to be talking about in a minute soon. So this white powder, the father, who is a banker and not at all into this sort of thing, wanted the powder analyzed. And my contact in Amsterdam called me, and we agreed to do it. In fact, what that white powder was absolutely pure magnesium carbonate. People said to me, well, that could have been a flare. No. If it had been a flare, there would be traces of the container of the magnesium. It wasn't a flare. It was something else that left very pure, completely pure magnesium carbonate lying on the floor of that balcony. Now, this is the living room. Downstairs, it's been set up a number of different ways over the years that I've been going there. But I was doing a lecture in Amsterdam shortly after this, and the family came to meet me and asked if I would come and stay with them for a couple of days since I had some extra time. And I did go. The first night, I think I still had jet lag, and I went to sleep right away. But the second night, I had this curious sense not to go to bed. Now, I'm a late night person anyhow. I thought maybe it was that, but I knew I was supposed to stay up. And the parents, being perfect hosts, refused to go to bed until I had gone to bed. Yeah, I know. And I was torn there, but I had to stay up. So the three of us were sitting up in this living room. Robert, who does not speak a great deal of English, was exhausted with the effort and had gone to bed. His two sisters were in bed upstairs also. And just the father and the mother and I were downstairs. And we were talking, the lights were very low. And suddenly the father said, "There, there." And he pointed out those windows. And he had just seen a flash out in their tiny little garden of a type that he had seen before. Flashes emanating from those cedar trees. Well, I hadn't seen it because my back was to the window, so I turned my chair around, and I was maybe 3 feet away from those windows. And the most incredible thing then started to happen. Oh, I don't know how many minutes went by before the first one, but I started to feel a tingling at my waist, front and back and sides, that slowly started to move up my body. And it was moderately intense, but not so intense I was scared at first. By the time it got to my neck, it was very strong, and I was getting very scared. I didn't know what in the world this was, but I didn't like it. And it occurred to me, the hell with science, I'm getting out of here. It's exactly what I thought. At exactly that moment that I thought that, the tingling stopped completely. And this light show then started outside those windows that I've never seen anything like it before, or, well, I can't quite say since. I've certainly never seen anything like it before. There were balls of light, this big, bluish, hanging. There were smaller, bright, dense, opaque balls of light. There were flashes going off everywhere. And there were blobs that were falling down and then bouncing along I could see along the bricks on the patio. And all of this is going on simultaneously. It's like, oh my God, Ginny, you didn't know where to look first. It lasted 30, 40, 50 seconds, and then it stopped. And it was like nothing had happened at all. Gee, did I see that? Nobody inside spoke. It turns out that the father was terrified. The mother, not too happy either. And I wasn't afraid, but I was definitely a little cautious. Nobody said a word. Several minutes went by, and then this tingling started again. Right at the waist, front and back, moved up. When it got to my neck, again, it got much more intense. And the intensity, again, frightened me. Again, I had the thought, I'm looking at the door, I'm like, I'm out of here. And the second I had that intention to leave, it stopped, and the light show started again. And this repeated itself over 11 minutes. We know that it happened at least 5 times. It may have been 6 or 7, I can't remember. And towards the end, I was getting braver because I hadn't been hurt. So I got very close, I was right next to the glass. And I could see these things plopping down and bouncing along it was incredible. I didn't have enough nerve to go outside. I wish I had, but I didn't. So 11 minutes passed, the thing ends, and I turned around to the parents and said, well, that's it, that's all. As if I knew. I didn't have the faintest idea what was going on. Why did I say that? It turns out it was the end. And after a while, the father recovered his senses somewhat and told me that this had occurred because I was there, had occurred because of me. And the mother apparently felt the same thing. Personally, my impression was that it was very location specific. It happened in a very precise area that was maybe 10 feet wide by no more than 10 to 12 feet deep. I didn't at that time accept the notion that it had anything to do with me directly. The next morning, I went out, I wanted to go over that entire area, photograph everything I could. So I went out into the back with a new roll of film. I'd done a few shots out front, came back to these cedar trees where the first lights had seemed to come from. And I started to take photographs. As you can see, I get to 18, the camera's working fine. On shot number 19, I had gotten very close to the cedar trees. I was standing where they were. The camera all of a sudden went off by itself, shot the 19th frame, and then rewound itself. I didn't touch it. At the time, I didn't think anything of it, and it wasn't until quite a bit later that I started to realize this happens all the time now when I go there. Then I didn't notice it. There were a number of other incidents, these burning balls of light. There were so many we couldn't begin to cover. This is another showing you the paint all blistered on the outside of the house. They hit the skylight there, sometimes leaving marks. There were crop circles occurring. Here you can see the relationship of their house to the farm field behind, and this is just one of the crop circles that has occurred there. That next year I went back and I had gotten a crystal, a very strange story, but it's another time. Someone had given me this crystal that seemed very important. And I don't exactly know why, but I decided to take it to Holland, and my initial idea had been to give it to Robert. But when I got there, I decided to put it in a small plastic, like sandwich bag, as a, I don't know what the words are, a sign of recognition of these energies. I didn't know what was going on, but I felt it was appropriate. So I put it into the plastic bag, and I hung it in that tiny little tree you see there. They had just planted that little thing, and one little branch, and I hung it in that branch in the middle of the day as, I don't know, I know you're here kind of thing. And this is what happened. I waited, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, nothing happened at all. So I thought, well, heck, I'm going upstairs. I went upstairs to take a bath. I hadn't been upstairs 2 minutes when Robert and his mother, who were both downstairs, saw this ball of light, about golf ball sized, come shooting down from the sky directly to that plastic bag, etch out a border around the crystal, which is sitting there, so that the piece of plastic fluttered down to the ground, only on one side. The back side of the plastic bag wasn't touched, and the crystal stayed in. It happened so quickly I couldn't get back down to see it, but I did retrieve the bag and the crystal. And in fact, the tiny little piece of plastic, what kind of heat can cut the plastic out on one side? You know how thin those bags are. I don't know. Then that same year, I think, no, this is the next year. The crop circles were happening around Robert, as they always do. He was making these various reports. But this was unusual. This is the field behind the house, and he had had the first crop circle. He had seen a flash of light, and boom, a circle had opened up. Then he had seen this pink-purple ball of light come flying in from the left, down low over the field. It gets to where one of those arrows is pointing, and it expanded into what he calls a disc-shaped light. And he's real clear, light, not craft. Pinkish purple. And it then becomes stationary and discharged some energy down to the crop surface. When it did so, another crop circle opened. And he calls me every time, so now I have 2 in 1 week. I didn't have any money, didn't think I could get there, so I called a friend of mine in Holland to see if he would get samples from these 2 formations so that we could work on them, particularly the pink-purple light ball one, because Robert had watched while that occurred. Before the guy could get there, actually, a third event occurred during the daytime where Robert saw a sphere, a large sphere of yellowish light with a haze around it like a mirage effect, really. And he saw that come in over the field in another part of the field, become stationary, and underneath that, a circle with spokes going off opened up. At that point, I decided I had to go, but before I knew I was going, I made up this sampling diagram, and Elcho Hasselhoff did the actual sampling for us. He also did something else, which I didn't know he was going to do. He decided he wanted to test Levengood's ideas. He was going to do it himself, and he did it without telling us. We knew nothing about this. He devised a node length measuring process that used the computer. Levengood does it all visually. But this guy, Elcho, developed the computer program to do this and did it all with the computer. And he got absolutely stunning results. These are the different radii in one of the circles. The controls are on the upper left, and then you have 3 different diameters in one of those circles. In this case, the one that the pinkish purple light ball made. Now, the relationships, the peak in the middle indicates the node length in the center of each of the formation. And then, as you can see, the node lengths are decreasing as you get closer to the edges along all 3 diameters. But what's really weird is that if you notice, all three diameters are different, each from the other. It's not even. Each one of them, they're diminishing as you get closer and closer to the edges, but they're not doing it in the same way. I mean, this is stunning. And one of those graphs, he felt indicated very clearly that the point of energy was a light ball, which he could figure out the height of. And he said that it jived pretty much with what Robert had seen, this pinkish purple light ball. So in his opinion, it was this light ball that caused the node length change. Levengood believes that the light ball is an artifact of the energy itself, which is probably the energy being invisible. Who's right, I don't know. But the point is, you get this incredible node length change that is so balanced on both sides of one diameter, and yet not the same in all three diameters. There have been a number of events that are very poignant in Robert's situation, having to do with the spiritual. This formation occurred on what would have been a recently deceased uncle's birthday. Because it's in the shape of a cross, and because his uncle had recently died, he felt that this was a very significant, very important formation. And when I arrived that summer, he insisted that we go immediately to the field where that formation had been. The field had already been cut because it occurred very early, but he wanted to go in it and do what we regularly do, which is take photographs in the field. These are a couple of frames that I took. From here on in, we're going to see a lot of my photographs, most of them on film, because that's all I know how to use. In these two photographs, you'll see some anomalies. On the one on the right, the negative on the right, there's a light ball in the upper left-hand corner, but it's this other object, this which was in the next frame. I took quite a few shots, but in 2 frames, side by side, we got these anomalies. Now, you can hardly even see Robert in this one. He was standing 6 feet, 7 feet in front of me. He was lit up by the flash in the first shot, but he is not lit up by it here. And what is that object over his head? We're out in the middle of a farm field. There's no lights. There's nothing around us. But this is typical of the kinds of things we get all the time. Then that same summer, he and I saw a crop circle form. I mean, what are the odds? We had been out in the fields with magnetometers, doing all sorts of studies, I was there for Dr. Roll that summer, trying to determine if there were magnetic anomalies where these crop circles were occurring. It was hot that summer. I had to lug this heavy equipment up over dikes and through barbed wire fences, and I am too old for this kind of stuff. I was not happy. Came back from a couple of weeks of this and was in a lousy mood. Did take this photograph out the balcony. I was staying in Robert's room this time, looking out the back to make sure, I had a document that the field was okay when I arrived. And this is the back of the field, in the back of the house this day we came back from after 2 weeks of magnetometer readings. What's important is to recognize the lighted room down on the left is the kitchen. The lighted room up above in the balcony is Robert's bedroom. And that becomes important with what happens now. He and I were in the kitchen. It was around 3 o'clock in the morning, and he asked me if we were going to go out to do some more of this photographing, which he likes to do. And I was so angry. I said, I'm sick and tired of this phenomenon. Why is it so hard to study? Why can't it be more direct? I'm going up to bed. So I trotted off upstairs to the bedroom, and Robert stayed downstairs in the kitchen. Within minutes, this is an artist's rendition, I had just gotten in the bed, and I heard the cattle down the road bellowing, and I knew something was up because I didn't even know there were cattle there until this moment. They'd been there all along. They'd never been this disturbed. And they carried on for a while and then became quiet, then bellowed again, and I knew. And all of a sudden, this beam of light, I'm thinking from where I'm sitting, it's about this big, comes crashing down right in front of these floor-to-ceiling glass doors, which I had wide open, lit up the field so bright I could see half a mile away, easy like daytime, and lit up my room as if there were spotlights on it. I couldn't be quite sure how close that light was, but I saw the tube, and I saw within it this spiraling motion, an enormous force. It's impossible in a drawing to show you how bright it was outside and also show you how bright the light was. After the first one, it stopped. It only lasted a second or so, and it was dead quiet. And I even wondered if I'd seen it. Within seconds, another one. Boom, in exactly the same place, exactly the same force. And again, everything lights up like it's on Broadway. By this time, I'm wondering, is Robert seeing the same thing? I hope he is seeing the same thing, because the kitchen windows look out in the same way. Well, I could hear him then starting to run up the stairs. He's yelling for me. He saw the first two. Before he got up to my bedroom, the third one occurred, all right in the same place, all doing exactly the same thing. No smell, no sound, no electromagnetic effects on the skin. And if he hadn't been there too, I'm not sure I'd have known. These are our drawings later that night. His drawing on the top, mine on the bottom, showing what we both saw. He and I didn't speak about the spiraling at all, and yet he diagrammed it also. As soon as the light tubes had quit, Robert and I went to the doors to go outside. I was afraid to go out because if another one of those things came down, I was sure I'd get zapped. He was also, I mean, this time he was a little nervous too. But he's younger, he's braver, he steps out first. He didn't get zapped, so I went. And we get to the fence at the back of the house. This is 90 feet away from the back of the house. And I had a flashlight, and I could see what looked to me to be steam still rising from a brand new crop circle. The next morning, I didn't have to get out of bed in order to see that crop circle. All I had to do was raise my head, and there it was. Now, it wasn't, in fact, a circle. It was an ellipse, about 35 feet in width or length, with its crossbar like the long pathway and a crossbar like the capital letter T. Robert told me that this formation was for me. Again, I'm very skeptical, it doesn't make any sense to me. So I thought, well, maybe, but didn't take that as seriously as maybe I should have. The formation itself was in a field of string beans. There's never been one, as far as I know, in string beans before, but that's what that field was planted in, so that's what it happened in. And this is a close-up to simply show you the bean plants, which you can see all the beans on the plants. The center swirl was simply one direction this way and one direction this. The beans were fully developed, and although Robert wouldn't do this, I did. I took a bunch of them and then had them for dinner. Nothing happened as far as I can tell. He was waiting to see if I lit up or something. We didn't sample this one. It was in the middle of the hoof and mouth problem that was going on there in Holland and England, and we couldn't get soils or plants out. I feel a little bit stupid because I could have sampled and left them there, and then at some point in the future retrieved them, and unfortunately I didn't think of that. Now we're on to the last bit of this. I hope one of these days to do a lecture just on Robert, 2 or 3 lectures just on Robert. But this is an incident that is typical of some of the things that are going on more recently. This is just a road, one of these roads in the middle of the farm fields out there in Holland on the top. And Robert, this was, you can't read the year, I think this was 2003. And I had been in Poland that year and in a couple of other places, and I was stopping by Robert's on the way home, just briefly. Normally I stay with him 2 or 3 weeks in the summer, but I didn't have enough time this year, so I was just stopping briefly. The day I got there, he had just had another of these amazing encounters. He'd been riding his bike along the road in the upper picture, and a ball of light, a large, huge, the size of a car, started toward him from the other end of the road. There was nowhere to go. There were no buildings around. There weren't even any ditches to go into. There's nothing he could do. He sat there, and as it engulfed him, he started to lose consciousness. He felt his bicycle dropping away down to the road as he was lifted up. The next thing he knew, he was lying on the ground. He saw multiple strange lights and heard a roaring sound. The bottom photograph shows you where he awakened. It took a few minutes for him to clear his mind, and he realized he was lying next to a highway and that the roaring sound was traffic and the lights were cars, and he rolled down the embankment because he didn't want to get killed. When he got down to the bottom of the embankment, he saw a small rainbow-shaped light out in the field, And he looked very carefully. He realized that there was a brand new crop circle, one that he had never seen before. He had no idea where he was, but he knew he hadn't seen the circle. It was a circle with 4 or 5 small circles out around it. In the middle of that circle, he saw something white, quite bright white and glowing. So he walked across this drainage ditch and into the field, got to the big circle itself, and walked up to this white object and realized it was the sweater that he had had on when he was on the bicycle. Well, it's cold, so he put it on. Next to it, he sees a dark lump, and he goes over and pushes that, and it's his leather jacket that he had also had on. So he put that on too. The camera, which he had around his neck, had disappeared. They never did find that. And after a while of looking at the crop circle, he went out, and he had no idea what time it was, much less where he was. And he started walking in one direction on the road until he saw a sign that he realized was absolutely in the wrong direction. So he turned around and started walking the other way. About a quarter of a mile away from the field where the crop circle was, he found his bike lying on the side of the road. And so, of course, he got on the bike and went home. Well, the next day, I arrive. It turned out, by the way, it was 17 kilometers away from his home, which is much farther than he normally goes on the bike. The next day I arrived, and it was late, and we immediately had to go to this field. The farmer had cut it that morning because it was the end of the season, but Robert and I did what we always do. I started to take pictures, he took pictures, and I'm just going to show you a few of them. There are a few of these little light balls. This is Robert and his sister's boyfriend are in these pictures. Now this is Robert out in the field with me taking these pictures with film. And here, I don't know what he's doing. He's perfectly normal, I mean, perfectly everyday in most ways. And he kids around a lot, so I never am sure when he's trying to do something. Maybe he was here, maybe he wasn't. But as I took these photographs, that's his mother and the boyfriend of his sister, there were a whole bunch of these photos. And what was so startling to me when they got developed was I'd gotten exactly the same things in Poland with a man there who is equally involved. This was the most startling of the ones of Robert that I got that afternoon. And this is 2 days now after he had been in these fields, come to in that situation. That night when I got back to the house, I did what I always do, which is take some pictures right off the balcony. And whatever that was also at the house, the upper right-hand corner again. All right, we're on to the last tray. Time to switch. I think everybody nowadays is so technically sophisticated, so much more so than I am. They all have this PowerPoint stuff, and I'm good at email and a few little things like that, but I haven't figured out PowerPoint yet. All right, the next year I was able to go and spend 3 weeks with Robert because he had called me in May with some incredible information. One of the things I wanted to do when I got there was to document as much as I could about that place where he had found himself when he woke up. And this is me in the car, he's taking a picture of me there. Of all the pictures, I took some digital, I took film, I took Polaroid. Most of them are screwed up. There are a few that are normal, and I've included them. At the top there, we have the field. This is a year later in which the crop circle had occurred. On the bottom is one of the smaller circles from the year before. Now this is, I think, the only photograph I've got of the location where Robert woke up that turned out to be normal. Here's the same location with that, you see the light ball where his body was? The pinkish ball. Another shot of that same area. You see the fog in the trees? A shot of him out in the, dozens of these photographs. I've just picked a few to give you some idea of the aberrations that were going on there. Then we have this series of photographs that Robert took on Easter Sunday of what looks like a glowing cross. He saw this with his eyes. This didn't just appear on film. He actually saw it. This is that same year. And then we have the thing that made everybody finally pay attention in Holland. This chair in that little corner is where Robert said, he called me up and said that a being, a creature had materialized in his living room the night before. He said that it took a long time for it to come. Once it was there, it stayed for some 40 minutes. He said that there were multiple beings, that there was just one that became very solid and communicated in some way with him. And he told me that when it leaned over toward him in the chair, he could see the wrinkles in its stomach. And here's the one that materialized very fully. He's very, very clear that this is not your standard ET, that this is of the spiritual realm. And he, many, many ways he says that. But in his opinion, this is not, at least what I think of, I mean, you may have other ideas, but what I generally think of is your generic ET. He said that this being communicated to him that they, he, it, and others were making the crop circles. That it, or they, their group, are terribly concerned about pollution. The situation here on Earth of us ruining our water and our air. He also said that he got the impression that they were going to appear en masse fairly soon, not to hurt people, but it's rather like with a donkey, you have to hit them on the head to get their attention. That they were beginning to realize that it might take that to get enough people to pay attention to the fact that there are other realities, other aspects to realities, and that we have to clean up our act. Now, many people have looked at that picture and told me how it could have been done. You have to know Robert doesn't have the faintest idea how to use a computer. Doesn't have one, couldn't use it, doesn't know what to do. I also thought this would help you. There are many shots that he took over the period of time the being was there, and these give you the times. You will see it took a full 63 minutes, and the creature, the being, whatever it is, becomes more and more distinct. Fades down a bit on the top there, and then becomes more distinct again until it became as solid as that bottom one, and then stayed for the next 40-some minutes. Now, you should know also that Robert he saw this whole thing with his eyes. Not only did he see it, his mother subsequently on 2 occasions has seen these beings. His sister has seen them perhaps more times than he has. He himself has seen them now 8 or 9 times. I think Madeline has perhaps seen them 20 or 30 times. She sees them all the time. Her boyfriend one night was scared out of his wits because he was sitting on the couch, didn't know anything about this, and one of them materialized. That boyfriend is now gone. And you can have a little sympathy for him, you know. Now, the other thing that I can tell you, in addition to the fact that Robert knows nothing about computers and has never lied to me, his parents and he have told me of these hundreds of events. And if anything, they've always understated what actually was there when I got there and could see what had happened physically. They have never overstated. If I didn't know them as well, and I don't expect all of you to believe it because I'm telling you, because if you haven't been directly involved, it may be just impossible to understand. But when I was there last, this is in 2004, when I went to stay with him again, I saw these beings like this appear on my camera and on his. If I'm holding, you feel the energies present. I can feel them too. I know when they're around, not always, but a lot of the time. If I take the camera and take the picture, I will get very strange light things. If Robert's holding the camera, you get something like this. And I stood with my head right next to his, I mean, literally, watching the LED screen on the digital camera, and over and over and over, hundreds of shots we did this. I would look in front of the camera with my eyes and see absolutely nothing. But on the LED screen, when he presses the thing, that's what we get. So, I've stood there myself. I've seen it over and over. I'm not the only person that's done that, but this is not Robert making it up. A friend of mine said, well, you could easily do it this way, and he makes this funny little cartoon. He holds it on a focus and says that this is what Robert's doing. Again, I've been standing there right with him. He's doing nothing. He picks up the camera, and it doesn't matter whether it's film. It doesn't matter whether it's digital. If he's holding it and they are present, then that's what happens. To wind this up now, I'm just going to show you some of the shots. A lot of these are mine, to show you what happened this last time I was there. I put Robert in that chair. I wanted to see what would happen. These two shots are sequential. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, you see the light phenomena. We did not see that with our eyes. Look at his hands. Look at his face. These are film. When the energies are present, the color goes funny. It becomes orangey or yellowy. You see how we start to lose the focus? Then these streaks appear. We got a lot of these. Sometimes they're orange, sometimes they're white, sometimes they're yellow. One night, all we got was this. Robert and I sit up night after night, and we do this over and over again. The effects are not the same every night. On only one night, out of 3 weeks, these light balls occurred. Then an event occurred around this Buddha. This is one of the few actually normal pictures I have. There was another picture of the Buddha that disappeared. And there was this being. This was it's the only shot I have left. All of the photographs of the creatures, of one of the most incredible shots of the Buddha, and the bird people were selectively taken off my camera after having been on there for 3 days. Some shots remained, others were gone. This is the only thing left of a one that Robert had never seen this being before. It looked to me like great big eyes, like an owl, sort of, and maybe a beaked nose, and then feathers. And I asked him what it was. I mean, the two of us saw it, but he had never seen it before, and the only photograph I have left that shows even a part of it is that one. Then there were all these double images. I was sick part of the time I was there. On the couch, he was taking pictures. See that object in the foreground on the right? That cylindrical thing? There's nothing there. Lots of these tubes of light, and many of them are so extreme that you can't, that Robert is behind that, you can't see, but it just wipes out. And these combinations of this orangey light, and this one, that whole white thing on the left, there's just a plain wall there. The book has been written. It's in Dutch. A lot of the pictures are in here. I think it's going to be translated because it's a bestseller in Holland now. As soon as it's available in English, I'll put that up on the BLT website. If you're interested in it in the Dutch, contact me by going to the BLT website at just www.bltresearch.com. My telephone number is right there, and I'll give you information as how to get it if you'd like to see it in Dutch. But I think it's going to be available in English, and it is just the first of several books. They've left down huge amounts of things here. Probably could write 10 books. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming. Hope to see you again.